The Mansion's Secret. A German shepherd who chose loyalty over fear. It began on a quiet road that wound through the hills, where iron gates guarded a mansion too large, too perfect, too silent. To a child's eyes, it might have looked like a castle. To her mother, it looked more like a prison. When Emily and Rachel walked through those gates for the first time, neither of them knew how quickly the shine of luxury would reveal something darker. Inside those walls was Richard Stonebridge, wealthy, polished, powerful. But beneath his charm lived a cruelty that even the staff had learned to fear. And then there was Shadow, a retired German shepherd police dog, scarred by service but unbroken in spirit. No one expected Emily, with her tender hands and innocent heart, to awaken something in him, a loyalty so fierce that it would stand against the cruelty of a man who thought himself untouchable. What unfolded in those halls was not just the story of wealth and control, but of love stronger than fear, and a bond between a little girl and a dog who became her shield. This is the story of how loyalty can tear down walls that money builds. The car rolled slowly up the gravel drive, tires crunching with a rhythm that sounded almost too loud in the stillness. Emily pressed her small hands against the glass, her wide brown eyes darting to every corner of the world, unfolding beyond the window. The iron gates of Stonebridge Estate had swung open only moments ago, their black bars glistening like teeth against the winter sky. Behind them stretched manicured lawns, hedges trimmed with surgical precision, and fountains that sprayed crystal arcs of water into the air. It felt like stepping into a painting she had only seen in storybooks. Castles where princesses lived, where every stone carried a secret. Emily's lips parted in a soft gasp. "Mom, it's so big." Rachel sat beside her, back stiff against the leather seat. Her fingers, restless, twisted the thin gold band on her left hand until the skin beneath it flushed red. She forced a smile when Emily looked her way, though her eyes betrayed a nervous shine. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "It is." The car turned, and the mansion revealed itself in full. Stonebridge rose from the earth like a monument carved to impress. A sweep of white marble steps climbed toward tall double doors framed in dark oak. Columns soared upward, their shadows stretching across the polished stone terrace. To Emily, it seemed like magic, like the castles in fairy tales, where every room might hold wonders. But Rachel, staring at the same sight, felt the opposite. The weight of its grandeur pressing down, smothering the fragile hope she carried. The driver stopped at the base of the steps. Before Emily could scramble out, Rachel gently caught her arm. "Remember," Rachel murmured, bending close so her breath warmed Emily's ear. "Be polite. Speak when spoken to. And stay close to me." Emily tilted her head, puzzled by the tremor in her mother's voice. She nodded, though she didn't understand why her mother's hand was so cold. The doors opened before they reached them. Richard stood, framed in the golden light of the entry hall. His suit was immaculate, pressed to sharp edges, a pale silk tie knotted neatly at his throat. He was not a man who needed to raise his voice to command attention. It radiated from him in the rigid set of his shoulders, in the way his eyes lingered not with warmth, but with calculation. "Rachel." His lips curved in what resembled a smile, but never reached his eyes. And this must be Emily. Emily clutched her mother's hand tighter. She wanted to curtsy like the princesses in her storybooks, but something about the way Richard looked at her, not at her really, but through her, as if weighing her presence against some hidden ledger, made her shrink behind Rachel's skirt. "Say hello, sweetheart," Rachel coaxed softly. "Shh. Hello, sir," Emily said, her voice as thin as the breeze skimming across the marble steps. Richard's eyes flicked over her. His smile did not falter, but neither did it grow. "She's smaller than I expected." He stepped aside, motioning them into the cavernous hall. "Come in. There's much to show you." The air inside smelled faintly of polish and something floral, though Emily could not name the scent. Chandeliers glowed overhead, scattering light across marble floors that reflected their steps. Portraits of stern men and elegant women lined the walls, their painted eyes following silently. Emily's awe grew with every corner. Velvet drapes as tall as trees, staircases curving like ribbons, rooms that seemed to whisper promises of exploration. But Rachel's breath caught. Every glimmer of gold, every glint of crystal reminded her of the bargain she had struck, the safety she prayed she had bought for her daughter. Her heels echoed too loudly on the floor, each step reverberating like judgment. "You'll find Stonebridge well ordered," Richard said, his voice even, smooth. He gestured with a hand that bore a heavy silver watch. "There are rules, of course, but they're simple. Structure ensures harmony." Emily turned her head at the word harmony. It sounded lovely, like the soft notes she hummed when she couldn't sleep. She thought perhaps Richard might be kind after all. Yet when she glanced up, his gaze was fixed not on her, but on Rachel. Sharp, assessing, as though daring her to contradict him. Rachel lowered her eyes. "We'll follow your rules," she murmured. Richard's smile returned, thinner this time. "Good." They moved deeper into the mansion, and Emily's small shoes tapped against the marble. Her wonder was undimmed, though a whisper of unease tugged at her. She thought she saw shadows move in the corners, though it was only the play of chandeliers. She squeezed her mother's hand again, grounding herself. At the foot of the grand staircase, Richard paused. "Emily, your room has been prepared upstairs. I trust you'll find it comfortable." Emily nodded shyly, though she longed to see it immediately. The idea of a room so large it could be prepared sounded marvelous. Yet Rachel's fingers tightened around hers, and she sensed something heavy beneath the polished words. Before they ascended, Richard leaned slightly toward Rachel, his voice just low enough for Emily not to hear. "Remember why you're here. Appearances matter." Rachel's throat tightened. She forced another smile, one that trembled at the edges. Emily tugged at her sleeve, unaware of the tension above her head. "Mama, can we see my room now?" "Yes, darling," Rachel said, her voice cracking with both relief and dread. "Let's see your room." As they climbed, Emily's laughter returned, a child's excitement reborn in each step. But Rachel's heart sank heavier with each rise of the staircase. She knew, though Emily could not yet see it, that beyond the iron gates and the polished halls, Stonebridge was less a sanctuary than a cage. And Richard, waiting at the top of the stairs, was already calculating the cost of keeping them both within its walls. The dining room glowed with an unnatural warmth, the chandeliers above casting amber light onto polished silver and crystal. The table was far too long for 3 people. It stretched endlessly, its gleaming surface broken only by the neat arrangement of plates, folded napkins, and candles that flickered like silent sentinels. Emily sat near the middle, her small legs swinging nervously beneath the heavy wooden chair. Rachel sat beside her, posture upright, though her eyes kept darting toward Richard at the head of the table. He looked as though he belonged there, as if the house itself bent toward his presence. The first course had been served by quiet staff who moved like shadows, their faces expressionless. Emily stared at the creamy soup before her, the delicate china bowl rimmed with gold. She had never seen dishes so fine. She dipped her spoon carefully, afraid even to clink it against the porcelain. Richard watched. His gaze was steady, appraising. "Emily," he said finally, his voice smooth, but carrying an edge that silenced the room. "Do you know why we eat at this table?" Emily swallowed the small spoonful she had taken and shook her head. "No, sir. Because order matters." His fingers tapped lightly on the table, a steady rhythm. "A family that eats together in silence learns discipline. Discipline keeps a household from falling into chaos." Rachel shifted in her seat, offering a quick protective smile toward her daughter. "She's still young," she said gently. "Children." Richard's eyes cut toward her, and the rest of her words died in her throat. Emily lowered her gaze, her hands suddenly clammy. She had thought dinner might be pleasant, like the little meals she and her mother used to share in their small apartment. 2 mismatched bowls, laughter, stories about the day. But here, laughter seemed out of place, forbidden. Richard continued, his voice calm as if reciting commandments. "There are rules in this house, and you will follow them. First, at the table, there is no unnecessary talking. Speak only when asked." Emily nodded quickly, though her throat tightened with the weight of silence. "Second," he said, setting down his spoon with deliberate precision. "Posture. Shoulders back, chin up. You will sit like someone who belongs here, not like a slouching street child." The words stung. Emily tried to straighten, but her body felt small against the high back of the chair. She glanced at her mother, who gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. "Third," Richard's voice deepened. "No running in the halls. This is a place of dignity, not a playground." Emily bit her lip. She had already imagined racing down the long marble corridors, her footsteps echoing like music, shadowing laughter chasing behind her. That dream crumbled quietly under his rules. "And lastly," Richard said, his eyes narrowing slightly, "you are not to go near the stables." Emily's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "The stables?" she asked softly. "Why not?" His gaze hardened, fixing her in place. "Because I said so. Horses are dangerous. Accidents happen. You will keep your distance." Rachel's hand slipped under the table, gently squeezing Emily's knee as if to remind her not to question further. The room felt colder despite the glow of the candles. Emily forced herself to nod, whispering, "Yes, sir." Richard leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "Good. Rules are what separate those who thrive from those who fail. You'll understand one day." The rest of the meal passed in tense silence, broken only by the clink of silverware and the muted steps of staff clearing plates. Emily tasted little of the food. Each bite seemed heavy, weighed down by Richard's voice still echoing in her ears. Her mind drifted to their old home, a cramped kitchen with a wobbly table and chipped mugs, but filled with her mother's laughter and the smell of warm bread. There had been no rules then, only love. Here, the mansion's splendor seemed to demand obedience, not joy. Rachel caught Emily's distant stare and brushed her daughter's hand gently under the table. It was a quiet act of reassurance, but it did little to ease the unease tightening Emily's chest. When dessert arrived, a delicate slice of cake adorned with sugared fruit, Emily pushed it around her plate rather than eating. Richard noticed, of course. He always seemed to notice. "You don't like it?" His question carried no curiosity, only scrutiny. Emily startled. "I do. It's just different." Richard's brow arched, and Rachel quickly interjected. "She's adjusting. It's been a long day." For a moment, tension coiled in the air, thick and heavy. Then, Richard gave a clipped nod. "Adjustment is necessary. Comfort will come later, once the rules are second nature." When at last the meal ended, Emily slid from her chair with relief. She wanted to run, to stretch her legs, to explore the mysterious corners of this palace-like home. But Richard's rules rang in her ears. No running, no laughter, no stables. She followed her mother toward the staircase, shoulders hunched, her small frame swallowed by the vastness of the hall. Behind them, Richard remained seated at the head of the table, his glass of wine untouched, eyes gleaming with quiet authority. As they ascended the stairs, Rachel leaned close and whispered just for Emily, "Don't let him take your joy, sweetheart. Promise me." Emily nodded, though her heart ached with confusion. She had wanted to believe this new life might be a dream come true. Instead, it already felt like a dream, where beauty hid something darker beneath. At the top of the stairs, she cast one last glance down at the long dining table, at Richard's shadowed figure, framed by candlelight. She shivered. Something about him, about the way he set rules like chains, told her instinctively that happiness here would always be earned through silence. And as she reached for her mother's hand, she felt the mansion close around her, not as a home, but as a cage dressed in velvet and gold. The upstairs corridor stretched on like an endless tunnel, lined with closed doors and portraits of ancestors Emily had never heard of. The carpet beneath her feet was soft, muffling her steps, yet each move forward made her feel smaller, swallowed by the mansion's silence. Rachel's hand held hers tightly, the warmth of her palm the only comfort against the chill that seemed to seep from the walls. At last, Richard stopped before a tall white door with a gilded handle. He opened it with a practiced sweep, as if revealing a stage prepared for its audience. "Your room," he said simply. Emily stepped across the threshold, her eyes widening. The space was vast, larger than the living room and kitchen combined in their old apartment. Light spilled from a chandelier overhead, scattering across pale pink walls, and a canopy bed dressed in satin sheets. Plush toys were arranged neatly along a shelf, untouched and perfect, their button eyes staring blankly. A dollhouse stood in the corner, grand and immaculate, every miniature chair and bed aligned, as though never meant to be played with. "It's—" Emily searched for the right word, her voice hushed. "Beautiful." Richard gave a short nod, satisfied with her awe. "I trust you'll be comfortable here." Without waiting for a reply, he closed the door behind him, leaving mother and daughter alone. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing. Emily walked slowly around the room, her small hand brushing the satin quilt, the polished surface of the desk, the untouched dolls. Everything gleamed, but nothing felt alive. It was as though someone had studied a child's dreams from a distance and recreated them with precision, forgetting the warmth that made them real. She paused before the window, staring out at the sprawling gardens below. The iron gates were faintly visible in the distance, far away now, like the line between two worlds she couldn't cross back into. A lump formed in her throat. "Do you like it, sweetheart?" Rachel asked gently, her smile fragile, hopeful. Emily hesitated. She wanted to say yes, to make her mother proud, but the truth slipped out instead. "It doesn't smell like home." Rachel blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" Emily turned, her small hands clutching the hem of her dress. Our apartment smelled like bread, and your perfume, and the couch squeaked when we sat on it. Here, it's too quiet, too clean. The words pierced Rachel more deeply than she expected. She crossed the room quickly, kneeling so her face was level with her daughter's. She cupped Emily's cheeks with trembling hands. I know it's different. I know it doesn't feel like ours yet. But I promise you, Emily, things will get better. Emily's eyes shimmered. Will they? Or will it always feel like we don't belong? Rachel's breath caught. For a moment, she couldn't answer. She thought of Richard's cold eyes at dinner, the weight of his rules pressing down. But then she forced herself to nod, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. We belong together. That's what matters. As long as I'm with you, you're with me. We'll make this place feel like home, one day at a time. Emily leaned forward, burying her face against her mother's shoulder. Rachel's arms tightened around her, clinging as though the embrace could shield them both from the cold marble world outside that door. After a long silence, Emily pulled back, her cheeks damp. She looked again around the room, the perfect pink, the flawless toys, the untouched bed. It looks like a picture in a magazine, but it doesn't feel like anyone's lived here. Rachel smoothed her daughter's hair. Then maybe it's waiting for you to live here, to make it yours. Fill it with your laughter, your drawings, your stories. That's how we'll change it. Emily sniffled, then managed a faint smile. Can I put my blanket on the bed? The one Grandma made? Of course, Rachel whispered, relief softening her voice. That blanket belongs wherever you do. Together, they unpacked a small suitcase. Emily's books with creased pages, her stuffed rabbit with one ear bent, a stack of drawings folded at the edges. Each item, when placed carefully around the room, softened the sharp perfection. The satin bedspread looked less intimidating with the worn patchwork blanket folded at its foot. The shelf of untouched dolls gained life when Emily nestled her ragged rabbit among them, its crooked ear defiant against their stillness. As the room shifted, so did Emily's shoulders, the tension easing slightly. She sat on the edge of the bed, hugging her rabbit close. It feels a little better. Rachel sat beside her, brushing strands of hair from Emily's face. Good. Remember, home isn't about walls or windows. It's about the love inside them. And we have plenty of that. Outside the window, dusk settled over the gardens, shadows lengthening across the manicured lawns. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Deep, commanding, yet somehow protective. Emily's gaze lingered on the darkening horizon, her heart tightening without knowing why. She whispered softly, almost to herself, I miss the old place. Rachel's hand tightened gently around hers. I do too, sweetheart. But sometimes we have to walk through hard places to reach better ones. Just hold on to me, and we'll get there together. Emily leaned against her mother, eyelids growing heavy. The weight of the day pressed down at last. Her excitement and unease tangled into exhaustion. She curled onto the bed, the satin sheets cool beneath her, her old blanket warm above. Rachel stayed by her side, watching her daughter drift towards sleep. The room glowed with lamplight, flawless and still. Yet beneath its polished beauty, Rachel sensed the hollowness. A stage dressed for appearances, not for living. She whispered a vow only the shadows heard. I'll protect you, Emily, whatever it takes. And as Emily's breathing slowed, steady and innocent, the mansion loomed silently around them, magnificent yet suffocating, a place where perfection was only another mask, and where cracks, Rachel feared, would one day show what lay beneath. The gardens of Stonebridge Estate stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of clipped hedges, marble fountains, and flower beds arranged with such precision that they felt more like exhibits than living things. To Emily, however, the gardens were a chance to breathe. Away from the chandelier-lit halls and Richard's watchful eyes, she could at least pretend she was exploring a world that belonged to her. The morning sun draped the lawns in gold, and dew still clung to the blades of grass, soaking the hem of her shoes as she wandered. Rachel had told her not to stray too far, but curiosity tugged stronger than caution. Every corner seemed to hold secrets, a path that disappeared behind a hedge, a gate half hidden in ivy, a statue of a woman whose stone eyes seemed almost alive. Emily followed the faint scent of hay and earth, different from the manicured roses that lined the main walk. Her small steps carried her to a weathered wooden building tucked beyond the trimmed lawns, the stables. The doors were half open, shadows spilling across the ground. Richard's rules echoed in her mind. No stables, but the pull was irresistible. Something about the scent, the sound of hooves shifting against straw, stirred a longing in her chest she didn't understand. She crept closer, peering through the crack in the door. Inside, the air was thick with warmth. The musky smell of horses, the creak of wood, the soft shuffle of hooves. A bay stallion shifted in its stall, snorting gently. And there, beside it, stood a man. His back was turned, shoulders broad, his shirt rolled at the sleeves. He moved with quiet strength, running a brush along the horse's flank in long, patient strokes. The rhythm of his hand, the care in his touch, spoke of someone who knew not only the animal, but respected it deeply. Emily held her breath. There was something about him. Something in the way his hand paused to pat the horse's neck, the way he hummed softly under his breath. It was a tune so faint she barely heard it, yet it lit a spark in her memory. Her heart began to pound. "Easy, boy," the man murmured, his voice low and steady. The sound pierced her like lightning. It wasn't just familiar, it was woven into her bones. She had heard that voice in lullabies half forgotten, in bedtime stories told before sleep, in fragments of dreams where she felt safe. She didn't know how, didn't know why, but every part of her small body screamed the same truth. That's my father. Her breath hitched, and she stumbled back a step, her shoes scraping against gravel. The stallion flicked an ear, but the man didn't turn right away. Instead, he reached for another brush, his movements calm, unaware of the little eyes watching from the doorway. Emily pressed her fingers to her lips, holding back the sudden rush of tears. She hadn't seen her father in years, or rather, she had convinced herself she barely remembered him. Rachel rarely spoke his name, and when she did, it was laced with sadness. All Emily had carried were fragments. A laugh like summer thunder, a strong arm lifting her into the air, a voice that could calm any fear. Now, standing in the shadow of the stables, those fragments fused into flesh and blood before her. She wanted to call out. Every instinct told her to run inside, to shout "Papa," and wrap her arms around his waist. But something, the rules, the silence of the mansion, the memory of Richard's cold eyes, held her frozen in place. The man finally straightened, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. For a brief moment, his face turned just enough for the light to catch his features, the jawline, the tired but gentle eyes, the faint scar above his brow. All of it carved itself into her memory, solid and undeniable. Emily's throat tightened. It was him. It had to be. She pressed her back against the wall beside the stable door, her chest heaving. Questions tumbled in her mind, jumbled and frantic. Why is he here? Why didn't Mama tell me? Why is he working like this, as if he's just a servant? Her hands trembled. She peeked once more, unable to stop herself. The man had resumed his work, brushing the stallion with care, his lips moving with quiet words meant only for the horse. There was weariness in his movements, yes, but also dignity, the kind of strength that endured in silence. Emily felt torn in two. Part of her wanted to burst into the stable and demand answers. Another part wanted to run back to her room, hide under her blanket, and pretend she hadn't seen. Instead, she lingered, rooted to the spot, her heart hammering so loudly she feared the man might hear it. Then, as if sensing something, the stallion tossed its head and let out a low whinny. The man turned slightly, his eyes lifting toward the door. Emily gasped and ducked back, pressing herself flat against the wooden wall outside. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Had he seen her? Did he know she was there? The silence that followed was unbearable. Only the rustle of hay and the soft shifting of hooves reached her. At last, she heard his voice again, faint but clear. "Thought I heard something. Just the wind, maybe." The words floated to her, heavy with a tone she couldn't name, a mix of suspicion and hope. Emily pressed her fist against her chest, trying to steady the wild beat of her heart. She backed away quietly, each step slow, careful, as though leaving the stables too quickly might break the fragile spell of what she had just discovered. When she reached the garden path again, she turned back once. The wooden doors stood half open, the sunlight catching dust motes inside. The man's shadow moved against the wall, broad and steady. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. She didn't know how, didn't know why, but she was certain the stranger in the stables was no stranger at all. He was her father. Emily could barely sleep that night. The image of the man in the stables haunted her like a half-remembered dream. His broad shoulders, the scar above his brow, the gentle way his hands brushed the horse's flank. Her heart told her it was him, her father. But how could that be? Why was he there, in Richard's house, working like a stable hand instead of living with them? She tossed beneath her quilt, staring at the ceiling, until dawn bled into the sky. When Rachel's soft breathing beside her deepened into sleep, her mother had stayed the night in her room, too restless to return to Richard's side. Emily slipped out of bed. Barefoot, she padded silently through the corridor, her stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand like a talisman. By the time she reached the gardens, the sun was climbing over the estate, painting the hedges in a soft golden light. The scent of hay drifted on the morning air. Emily's pulse quickened as she neared the stables again, her heart pulling her forward even as her mind screamed of rules broken. The doors stood ajar just as before. Inside, the man was already at work. He was lifting a bale of hay with ease, setting it down before a chestnut mare. The horse nickered softly, nudging his shoulder, and he laughed, a low, warm laugh that sent shivers through Emily. She couldn't hold back any longer. "Papa." The word escaped her lips before she realized she had spoken it. The man froze. Slowly, he turned, hay dust clinging to his shirt, his face pale, as if he had seen a ghost. His eyes, weary but unmistakably kind, locked on hers. For a long moment, neither moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. "Emily?" His voice broke on her name, cracked with disbelief and longing. Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. She dropped her rabbit and ran, her small arms flinging around his waist. He caught her instinctively, clutching her against him, as though he had been waiting years for this very moment. "It is you," she whispered against his chest. "I knew it was you." Michael Carter pressed his lips to the crown of her head, his arms trembling as they tightened around her. He smelled of hay and leather, of sweat, and something achingly familiar. Home. "My little girl," he murmured, voice hoarse. "You've grown so much." Emily pulled back just enough to look up at him, tears streaking her cheeks. "Why are you here? Why are you working like this? Mama said—" She trailed off, confusion choking her words. Michael's jaw tightened, and a shadow passed through his eyes. He brushed her cheek with the back of his hand, gentle as though she might break. "Your mother. She made choices to keep you safe. Choices that cost me more than I thought I could bear. Richard. He—" Michael stopped, glancing toward the stable doors, as if the walls themselves might have ears. Emily tugged at his sleeve, her voice desperate. "But you're my father. You're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be with us." His breath shuddered out. "I know. Every day. I dream of it. But Richard made sure I couldn't leave. He took everything from me, Emily. My dignity, my family. He forced me into these stables, told me this was the only way I could be near you at all." Emily's tears fell faster. "That's not fair." Michael's mouth curved into a sad smile. "No, it isn't. But if shoveling stalls and breaking horses means I get to watch you grow, even from the shadows, I'll do it." Her small fists clenched. "I don't want you in the shadows. I want you with me." His eyes closed, pained. For a moment, the mask of strength slipped, revealing the years of humiliation, the chains of servitude he endured for a glimpse of her. But when he opened them again, there was only tenderness. He knelt to her level, his hands resting firmly on her shoulders. "You have your mother's spirit," he said softly. "Strong, brave. Don't ever let this house take that from you." Emily sniffled, her bottom lip trembling. She reached out and touched the scar above his brow. "Did Richard do this to you?" Michael hesitated, then shook his head. "Not him. But he's done worse. He broke me in ways a scar could never show." She didn't understand all of his words, but she felt the truth in them. She leaned forward, wrapping her arms around his neck. He held her as though afraid she might vanish if he let go. "I'll come back," she whispered fiercely. "Every day, if I can. You won't be alone." Michael swallowed hard, his throat tight. "It's dangerous, Emily. If Richard finds out—" "I don't care," she interrupted, her voice sharp for the first time. "You're my father. He can't stop me from loving you." The words pierced Michael's heart like sunlight breaking through clouds. He closed his eyes, his grip tightening. For years he had endured silence, humiliation, the gnawing ache of being erased from his daughter's life. And now, in this fragile stable smelling of hay and dust, she had given him back the only thing Richard could never truly steal: her love. When Emily finally stepped back, her cheeks were flushed, her eyes still wet but burning with resolve. She picked up her rabbit from the ground and held it tightly. "I'll tell Mama. She has to tell me the truth." Michael's expression faltered, torn between fear and relief. "She's carried that truth like a stone on her heart. Don't be too angry with her." Emily tilted her chin. "I just want us to be a family again." Michael smiled sadly, brushing her hair back. "So do I, little one. More than anything." The sound of distant footsteps on gravel made them both stiffen. Michael rose quickly, his face hardening, retreating back toward the stall as though he had never left it. "Go now," he urged softly. "Before anyone sees you here." Emily nodded, though it hurt to leave. She glanced back once more at his familiar face, memorizing every line. Then she darted into the sunlight, the stable doors swinging shut behind her. As she ran back across the garden, clutching her rabbit to her chest, her heart pounded with a new rhythm: joy, confusion, and the heavy weight of questions. She knew only one thing for certain. The man in the stables was her father, Michael Carter, and nothing Richard could say or do would ever erase that truth from her heart. Emily didn't wait until evening to confront her mother. The moment she stepped back into the grand corridors of Stonebridge, her little heart thudded with urgency. She carried the weight of discovery like a secret too heavy for her small frame. The pink bedroom that Richard had called hers no longer felt safe. It felt like a stage set for lies. Rachel found her there after lunch, curled up on the canopy bed, with her stuffed rabbit clutched tight. Emily's face was blotchy, her eyes red from holding back tears. Rachel's heart clenched at the sight. She crossed the room quickly, sitting on the edge of the bed and brushing strands of hair from her daughter's forehead. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked softly, her voice careful, as if afraid the wrong word might shatter something fragile. Emily looked up, her eyes burning with accusation and desperation. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rachel froze. "Tell you what?" Emily's small fists tightened on her rabbit. "That Papa's here." The words struck like a blow. Rachel's breath caught, and her hands fell still in her lap. For a long moment, she couldn't answer. She stared at Emily, at the tears gathering in her daughter's eyes, and realized the secret she had guarded for years had crumbled in a single morning. "You saw him," Rachel whispered at last, her voice breaking. Emily nodded fiercely, her chin trembling. "He was in the stables. He called me by my name. He knew me, Mama. He's my father." Her voice cracked with both joy and hurt. "Why is he there, working like a servant? Why didn't you tell me?" Rachel closed her eyes, fighting the flood of shame rising in her chest. When she opened them again, tears glistened. She reached for Emily's hand, but Emily pulled back, clutching her rabbit like a shield. "I didn't want you to carry this pain," Rachel said, her voice low and unsteady. "I thought, if I kept it hidden, maybe you could grow up without knowing the cruelty of this house." Emily shook her head, her small body trembling. "But I know now, and it hurts more because you lied." The words cut deep. Rachel bent forward, her hands covering her face. For years she had endured Richard's cruelty, the cold bargain she had made to keep Emily clothed and fed. She had told herself the silence was protection. But now, seeing her daughter's wounded eyes, she realized the silence had been another kind of betrayal. "I never wanted this," Rachel whispered through her tears. "Do you hear me, Emily? I never wanted to marry Richard. He forced me." Emily's breath hitched. "Forced you?" Rachel lowered her hands, revealing a face etched with anguish. "When your father lost his position, when the debts piled high, Richard came with his offer. He promised safety. He promised a roof over our heads, clothes on your back, food on the table. But it wasn't kindness. It was control." Emily's lips quivered. "And Papa?" Rachel's eyes dropped, unable to hold her daughter's gaze. "Richard despised him. He wanted to break him, to humiliate him. He gave him work in the stables, stripped him of his pride, made him live in the shadows of this estate. He told me it was the price for our survival, and I let it happen." The confession spilled out like poison. Rachel's shoulders shook as sobs tore through her chest. She reached again for Emily, desperate for forgiveness. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought giving you comfort, safety, was worth my silence. But I see now, all I did was wound you both." Emily's cheeks were wet, her heart torn between anger and compassion. She pressed her rabbit against her chest, whispering, "He looked so tired, Mama. But when he held me, I could feel how much he loves me." Rachel's sobs deepened. "He never stopped loving you, even when Richard tried to erase him, even when her voice broke, trembling on the edge of guilt. "Even when I chose survival over love, he held on. I see it in his eyes every day." Emily crawled closer, her small hands reaching for her mother at last. She touched her tear-streaked cheek. "Then why don't we leave? Why do we stay here if it hurts him? And you? And me?" Rachel pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tightly, as though she might vanish. "Because leaving isn't simple. Richard holds power. He can ruin us, take everything, leave us with nothing. I've been so afraid." Emily buried her face against her mother's chest, muffling her sob. "But we already have nothing. Not really. Not without Papa." The truth of it landed heavy in Rachel's heart. All the chandeliers, the velvet drapes, the perfect pink rooms, none of it mattered. None of it filled the hollow ache of a family torn apart. She kissed Emily's hair, rocking her gently. "I'm sorry, my love. I'm so sorry for the lies, for the pain. You deserved better." He deserved better. Emily clung tighter, her tears soaking into her mother's dress. For a long while they stayed like that, two hearts beating in the silence of a room too perfect, two souls bound by sorrow and love. When at last Emily pulled back, her eyes shone with determination. "We can't let him stay in the shadows, Mama. He's my father, and I want him with us." Rachel cupped her daughter's face, her tears still falling. "So do I." Her voice was raw, heavy with resolve. "And one day, Emily, I promise, we'll find a way, no matter what it costs." Outside the window, the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the manicured gardens. In the stables, Michael Carter worked silently, unaware that his daughter's heart now carried the truth, and that Rachel's guilt had finally cracked open into confession. The mansion around them remained as polished and cold as ever, but within the walls of that pink bedroom, a vow had been born, fragile yet fierce. The truth had been spoken, and the silence that Richard had forced upon them was beginning at last to break. The night air at Stonebridge carried a chill that seeped into the marble corridors, silencing even the soft creaks of the old house. Rachel had fallen asleep beside Emily, exhausted from tears and confession, but Emily's eyes refused to close. Her thoughts tangled with images of her father in the stables, the truth her mother had whispered, and the ache of a family kept apart. And then, faintly, she heard it. A low sound carried on the wind through the open crack of her window. Not threatening, not human. A deep, resonant bark, followed by silence. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. Something in the sound tugged at her chest, the way her father's voice had. Strong, familiar, calling. Emily slipped from bed, careful not to wake her mother. Barefoot, she crept into the hall, the grand house asleep around her. Chandeliers hung like frozen constellations overhead, their crystals catching moonlight. She hugged her stuffed rabbit against her chest for courage, but her feet knew where they wanted to go, toward the sound. The garden lay hushed, shadows stretching across the grass. The dew soaked her nightdress as she tiptoed through the hedges, her heart racing with both fear and excitement. The barking came again, louder now, guiding her toward a cluster of stone buildings near the edge of the estate. She knew instinctively these were the kennels. Richard had never mentioned them, but the rules at dinner had hinted, no running, no stables, as though he feared what lay in the corners of his own domain. Emily reached the door of the kennels and hesitated. A heavy latch held it shut, but with effort, she lifted it, wincing at the scrape of iron. The door creaked open. The smell of straw, leather, and something wild drifted out. Inside, rows of cages lined the walls. Most were empty, but at the far end, half shrouded in shadow, she saw him. The German shepherd stood tall, his coat dark as midnight, flecked with silver along his muzzle. His eyes caught the moonlight, glowing amber like embers beneath ash. Muscles rippled under his fur as he shifted, watching her with a stillness that froze her in place. Emily's breath caught. He was enormous, larger than any dog she had ever seen. His ears pricked, tail still, gaze sharp, as if weighing every inch of her. For a heartbeat, fear rooted her to the ground. He could hurt me, she thought. One growl, one leap, and I'd be... But then the shepherd moved. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his head, pressing his great body against the bars. His eyes softened. A low, almost questioning whine rose from his throat. Emily's fear melted into something else. Wonder. She inched closer, her bare feet silent on the straw-scattered floor. "Hi," she whispered, clutching her rabbit tighter. "I'm Emily." The shepherd's ears flicked, and his tail gave the faintest thump against the ground. Her lips curved into a trembling smile. "You're not scary. Not to me." She knelt, small fingers slipping through the bars. For a moment, she thought he might ignore her. But then, with a gentleness that belied his size, the shepherd pressed his nose into her palm. His breath was warm, his fur coarse beneath her touch. Emily gasped softly. "You're real," she whispered, as though she had stumbled into a dream. The dog licked her hand once, then settled back on his haunches, watching her with steady, patient eyes. Something shifted inside her chest. In those eyes, she saw not threat, but understanding. The same kind of quiet strength she had glimpsed in her father's face. A protector. A friend. "What's your name?" she asked, leaning closer. "Do you have one?" From the shadows of the kennel, an old brass plate caught the light. She squinted, reading the letters etched deep into metal. "Shadow," she murmured aloud. The shepherd's ears twitched at the sound, and for the first time, his tail wagged slowly, deliberately. Emily giggled softly, the sound breaking through the hush of the kennels. "Shadow. That's perfect, because that's what you are, isn't it? Always there, even when no one sees you." The shepherd lowered himself onto his belly, pressing closer to the bars, his massive head resting where her fingers could reach. Emily stroked his fur, each pass of her hand steadying her own heartbeat. The fear that had haunted her since stepping through Stonebridge's gates seemed to ease in his presence, replaced by a warmth that spread through her chest. "You're my friend now," she whispered fiercely, her small voice trembling with conviction. "No matter what Richard says, you're mine." Shadow gave a low, approving rumble, his eyes never leaving hers. For the first time in days, Emily felt safe. Truly safe. Not because of chandeliers or velvet drapes, not because of Richard's rules or the mansion's size, but because here, in the quiet company of this old warrior, she sensed loyalty, unspoken, unshakable. Her fingers traced the silver fur at his muzzle. "Did you fight before? Did you protect someone? Like you're protecting me now?" Shadow's gaze softened, as if he understood. He shifted closer, his body language calm, watchful. Emily leaned her forehead against the cold iron bars, closing her eyes. "I wish I could take you to my room. I don't want to be alone in that big place anymore. But maybe I'm not alone now. Because I have you." The shepherd whined softly, the sound vibrating against her skin. Emily stayed there until her eyelids grew heavy, her body sagging with exhaustion. At last, she whispered, "Good night, Shadow," before slipping back into the night, leaving the kennel door closed behind her. As she disappeared into the garden, Shadow remained at the bars, ears pricked, eyes glowing in the moonlight. His body lay still, but his gaze followed her every step, as though marking her as his own. The mansion loomed dark and silent in the distance, but Emily carried a new warmth in her chest. Somewhere behind her, in the shadows of the kennels, she had found what Richard could never control. Loyalty born, not of fear, but of love. A bond had been born, and it would change everything. The days at Stonebridge began to stretch into a strange rhythm. Rules at dinner. Silence in the halls. Richard's cold eyes following Emily wherever she went. Yet something had changed since the night she found the kennels. She no longer felt entirely alone. It started with small things. On the morning after their first meeting, Emily wandered into the gardens with her rabbit tucked under her arm. She walked the gravel paths, humming softly to herself. When she reached the fountain, she turned and froze. There he was. Shadow stood at the edge of the hedge, half hidden, his amber eyes fixed on her. He didn't move toward her, didn't bark. He simply stood, watchful, silent as stone. For a moment, Emily wondered if she had imagined it, but when she smiled shyly, his ears twitched, and his tail gave a slow, deliberate sway. From that day on, she began to notice him everywhere. When she played among the roses, his shadow lingered by the gates. When she sat on the terrace sketching in her notebook, she glimpsed his dark form lying in the grass, chin on his paws, gaze never wavering from her. Even when she returned to the house, she would glance back through the tall windows and see him, the lone figure beneath the trees, steady as a guardian carved from earth and fur. At first, she thought it was coincidence, but soon the pattern became undeniable. Shadow was following her. Emily told no one. She carried the secret in her heart, a secret that made her feel safe in a place where safety seemed impossible. One evening, as Rachel tucked her into bed, Emily whispered, "Do you think dogs can choose people?" Rachel smiled faintly, smoothing her daughter's hair. "What do you mean?" "Like, maybe they just know who they're meant to protect." Rachel's eyes softened, though her voice was heavy with sadness. "Yes, sweetheart, I think they do." Emily held her rabbit close and drifted to sleep, never mentioning that she had already been chosen. The first time Richard noticed, the air in the mansion shifted. It was late afternoon. Emily had been skipping along the garden path, her small shoes crunching the gravel, when Richard's tall figure appeared at the edge of the terrace. His face was a mask of composure, but his eyes glinted with disdain as they fixed on her. "Emily," he called, his tone measured. "Come here." Her feet faltered. Every instinct told her to keep her distance, but obedience had been drilled into her by his rules. She took a hesitant step forward, and then a low growl rippled through the air. Emily turned. Shadow had emerged from the hedge, muscles taut, ears pinned back. His teeth were not bared, but the sound rumbling in his chest was enough to freeze the air between them. Richard's eyes flicked to the shepherd. His jaw tightened, though he gave no outward sign of unease. "The dog," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. "Still lurking." Emily wanted to speak, to tell him Shadow wasn't dangerous, not to her. But something about the way Richard looked at the dog, not with fear but with calculation, kept her silent. Instead, she moved closer to the shepherd, her small hand brushing against his fur. Instantly, the growl subsided, replaced by a steady stillness. Shadow's amber eyes locked on Richard, unblinking. Richard's lips curved in a thin, cold smile. "Interesting." Then he turned, retreating back into the house without another word. Emily knelt beside Shadow, her heart pounding. "You scared him," she whispered. The shepherd leaned his head into her palm, his breath warm, his body radiating calm strength. In that moment, Emily understood. Shadow wasn't just following her. He was guarding her. The proof came again that very night. Rachel had fallen asleep early, weary from another tense dinner. Emily lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, when she heard it. The faint scrape of shoes in the hallway outside her door. The steps were deliberate, too heavy to be her mother's, too slow to be a servant's. Her breath caught, and then came another sound, a soft thud, followed by a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the floorboards. Emily bolted upright. She crept to the door and pressed her ear against it. Shadow. He was lying there. She could hear the shift of his weight, the warning in his throat. Whoever walked those halls paused, lingered a moment, then retreated into silence. Emily's knees weakened with relief. She slid back into bed, her rabbit clutched to her chest, tears brimming in her eyes. For the first time since stepping through the iron gates of Stonebridge, she felt safe enough to sleep. When she woke at dawn and cracked the door open, there he was, curled against the threshold, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. A silent protector. She knelt beside him, her small hand brushing his fur. He stirred, blinked, and lifted his head, greeting her with a quiet whine. Emily smiled through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Shadow pressed his nose against her hand, as though he understood every word. In the days that followed, their bond grew in silence. Shadow did not bark when she ran to him. He did not demand play or food. He simply was, a shadow, constant and steady, filling the empty spaces where her father could not stand and where her mother's love could not shield her from Richard's cruelty. Every growl, every watchful glance, every night he lay outside her door, whispered the same vow. "You are not alone. Not here. Not ever again." And though Emily could not say it aloud, she carried the truth in her chest with fierce certainty. Shadow had chosen her. The morning air was crisp, heavy with the scent of dew and cut grass. Emily slipped from the mansion as the first light stretched across the gardens. She had learned by now to move quietly, her bare feet almost soundless against the gravel paths. Shadow was waiting, as always, by the kennels. He lifted his head when he saw her, amber eyes glowing in the dawn. His tail thumped once against the ground, a silent greeting. Emily smiled, the tightness in her chest easing. "Hi, Shadow," she whispered, clutching a piece of bread she had saved from breakfast. "I brought you something." She crouched, holding it out through the bars. Shadow sniffed, then gently took the bread from her hand, careful not to graze her fingers. His jaws closed with deliberate softness, as though he knew her skin was something fragile he must protect. Emily giggled. "You're polite, not like the pigeons in our old apartment." Shadow crunched the bread, then sat back, gaze steady. He didn't beg for more, didn't whine or paw at the gate. He simply watched her, waiting. Emily tilted her head, curiosity sparking. She remembered the stories Rachel once told her, that her father had worked with police dogs long ago, back before everything changed. Maybe Shadow was one of those. Maybe he still remembered his training. "Sit," she said softly, testing the word. Shadow was already sitting, but at the sound of her command, his ears flicked and his posture straightened, as if acknowledging her authority. Her heart skipped. "Stay." The shepherd didn't move, his gaze never leaving hers. Emily's eyes widened. She tried again, her voice stronger. "Down." For a moment, Shadow was still. Then, with deliberate grace, he lowered his body to the ground, resting his chin on his paws. Emily gasped. Her rabbit slipped from her arm as she clapped her hands together, barely containing her delight. "You do know!" Shadow's ears twitched at her laughter, and his tail swayed slowly against the straw. For the next half hour, Emily tested him with simple commands. Sit, stay, paw, heel. Each time, he obeyed without hesitation, but only when the words came from her lips. When one of the stable hands passed by, tossing a curious glance into the kennel and giving a half-hearted, "Sit, boy," Shadow didn't budge. His eyes slid back to Emily, ignoring the man entirely. Emily's chest swelled with a fierce, almost secret pride. Shadow had chosen her. He belonged to her, not to Richard, not to the estate. She found a brush hanging by the stall and hesitated, then stepped closer. "Can I?" she asked softly, as though the dog might answer. Shadow stood, pressing himself against the bars so she could reach. With careful strokes, she brushed his thick coat, working through the tangles. The shepherd sighed, closing his eyes, his body relaxing under her touch. Each stroke seemed to draw them closer, as though she were not just grooming him, but smoothing out the scars of a life she could not yet imagine. Long nights in service, orders barked in harsh tones, loyalty repaid with silence. "You're like Papa," she whispered, pausing as tears pricked her eyes. Shadow's eyes opened, head tilting slightly. Emily sniffled, brushing harder to hide the tremor in her voice. "He works in the stables because Richard made him. He stays quiet. He doesn't complain. He just keeps loving me, even if it hurts. You're the same. You stay by me even when I don't ask." Her throat tightened. She leaned her forehead against the bars, her small hands clutching his fur. "I don't want you to be forgotten, Shadow. Not like him." The shepherd pressed closer, his warm breath fanning across her skin, as if to tell her he understood. At that moment, Emily felt a bond deeper than words. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a promise. A silent vow that she would never again stand unguarded in this cold mansion. From then on, every morning became a ritual. She fed him scraps, brushed his coat, whispered her secrets into his ears. She tested his training until the words rolled from her tongue like magic spells only he could hear. And each time he obeyed, her confidence grew, a shield against the loneliness Richard tried to impose. But there was something else, something that unsettled her even as it comforted her. Shadow never barked for anyone else, never wagged his tail for the staff, only for her. One evening, when Rachel came to fetch her from the garden, Emily begged her mother to come see. "He listens to me, Mama. Only me." Rachel hesitated at the kennel door, her face pale. She had heard of Shadow before, the retired police dog, Richard kept but never used. She had always avoided him, sensing something Richard disliked about the animal. But when Emily whispered, "Sit," and the shepherd dropped instantly, Rachel's lips parted in shock. "He trusts you," she said softly, wonder mingled with fear. Emily smiled, her eyes shining. "He's my protector." Rachel touched her daughter's cheek, forcing a small smile. "Then maybe God has sent him to you, to keep you safe." Shadow stood, pressing his nose into Emily's palm, as though sealing the vow. Chapter. That night, Emily returned to her room with a new certainty. As she drifted toward sleep, she pictured Shadow lying outside her door, patient and watchful. She imagined her father whispering from the stables, promising protection. The two blended together in her heart. The man who had given her life, and the dog who now guarded it. In the silence of Stonebridge, loyalty was rare. But here, in the steady gaze of a shepherd, and the memory of a father's love, Emily had found both. And no amount of rules, no iron gates, could take that away. The dining room glittered with cold grandeur that evening. Candles flickered in crystal holders, chandeliers blazed overhead, and silverware gleamed against polished china. The table stretched long and wide, more suited to a banquet than a family meal. Yet, at its center, only 3 places were set. Richard at the head, Rachel to his right, and Emily opposite her mother, swallowed by a chair too large for her small frame. The staff moved quietly along the edges of the room, servants with downcast eyes and careful hands. They had learned to glide like shadows, to make themselves invisible. But their ears were sharp, and tonight their silence would bear witness. Emily sat with her hands folded in her lap, doing her best to remember Richard's rules. Back straight, chin up, speak only when spoken to. She glanced once toward her mother, who gave her a faint, encouraging smile. The scent of roasted meat and buttered vegetables filled the air, but Emily's stomach knotted with nerves rather than hunger. Richard lifted his glass of wine, swirling it as though even the liquid obeyed his command. His gaze shifted to Emily, pinning her in place. "So," he began, his tone deceptively smooth. "How is my little guest adjusting to her new home?" Emily startled at being addressed. She opened her mouth, words tumbling uncertainly. "It's very beautiful here, sir." "Thank you for—" Richard's chuckle cut her off, sharp and humorless. "Beautiful," she says. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Tell me, child, do you even know what beauty is, or have your standards been shaped by humbler surroundings?" The air grew heavy. Emily's cheeks flushed. She clasped her rabbit's ear in her lap beneath the tablecloth, hidden for courage. Rachel's voice trembled as she interjected. "Richard, she's only a child. She's doing her best." Richard didn't glance at his wife. His gaze remained fixed on Emily. "Children should learn quickly if they are to belong here. Tell me, Emily, in that cramped little apartment of yours, did you even know which fork to use?" A faint gasp slipped from one of the maids near the door, quickly stifled. Emily's face burned. She looked down at the shining array of utensils by her plate, so many more than she had ever seen. Her throat tightened. I don't know," she whispered. Richard's lips curved into a thin smile, victory gleaming in his eyes. "Exactly as I thought. Humble origins have a way of clinging, no matter how you dress them in silk." Rachel's hands clenched in her lap. "That's enough, Richard." His gaze flicked to her, cold and cutting. "Enough. Do you expect me to ignore the truth? She must learn, Rachel. If she is to stay in this house, she must shed the skin of poverty. Emily's eyes stung with unshed tears. She stared at the plate before her, the food untouched. Shame pressed heavy against her chest, crushing the fragile pride she had carried from her secret moments with Shadow. Rachel's chair scraped as she leaned forward, her voice sharper now. She is not a blemish to be erased. She is a child. My child. The room fell still. The staff froze mid-motion, glances darting nervously. They had seen Richard's temper before, the cruelty that lurked behind his polished exterior. But rarely had anyone dared to challenge him openly, least of all his wife. Richard's smile vanished. His eyes turned to Rachel, icy and hard. "Careful," he said softly, the warning clear beneath the calmness of his tone. Rachel held his gaze, her own trembling but unbroken. "You can belittle me if you wish, Richard, but I will not sit silent while you humiliate her." Emily lifted her head then, tears brimming but defiance flickering faintly in her eyes. She didn't understand the power games, didn't know the cost of her mother's courage. But she felt something shift in that moment. A crack in the marble mask Richard wore, a small fracture in his control. Richard noticed too. His jaw tightened, his fingers drumming once against the table before he leaned back in his chair. He took a slow sip of wine, eyes never leaving Rachel. When he finally spoke, his words were smooth again, but the venom lingered. "Very well. Let the girl eat in peace. Perhaps she will learn her place faster if she is not reminded of it." The tension eased only slightly, but the wound lingered in the air, raw and visible. The staff lowered their eyes again, but their ears had already carried the cruelty into their hearts. Whispers would travel through the halls before the night was done. About the master's contempt, about the mother who dared to defend, about the child caught between. Emily forced herself to lift her fork, though her appetite was gone. She kept her chin up, remembering his rules, but every bite tasted of ash. Beneath the table, her small hand found her mother's, squeezing tight. Rachel squeezed back, silent reassurance passing between them. And though Richard sat at the head of the table, his shadow looming long, Emily felt, for the first time, that the mansion's cold walls had witnessed something he could not erase. His contempt had been seen, his cruelty unveiled. The marble mask had cracked. The stables at Stonebridge stood apart from the mansion, a world of sweat and hay and honest labor. Michael Carter had long ago accepted the stink of manure, the sting of calloused hands, the humiliation of serving a man who had stolen everything from him. But that night, as he brushed down the stallion under the dim lantern light, the muffled echoes of laughter and voices carried across the lawns. The house was alive with its formal dinner, Richard's theater of power. Michael ignored it at first. He had trained himself to shut out the sound of crystal glasses and silver forks, the reminders of the table where he no longer had a place. But then, faintly, he heard another sound, a softer voice, breaking under strain. Emily's. He set down the brush, heart tightening. He moved to the stable door, leaning into the night air. Through the long windows of the dining room, he saw them. Richard at the head, Rachel stiff at his side, and Emily sitting too small in that oversized chair. He couldn't hear every word, but he could see the way Richard's lips curled, the way Emily's head bowed, the tears she tried to hide. His hands clenched into fists. Rage burned through his chest, hot and merciless. He had endured Richard's scorn. He had suffered the humiliation, the degradation, the stripping of his name and dignity. But to see his daughter targeted, to see her innocence mocked, her spirit pressed beneath that man's heel, it was almost more than he could bear. The stallion behind him snorted, sensing his fury. Michael gritted his teeth, forcing his breaths slow, steady. He could not storm through those doors. He could not throw Richard against the wall and demand the respect his daughter deserved. That would only tighten the chains around him, worsen the cruelty Emily would face. So he stood in the shadows, his body trembling with restraint, and let the rage burn silently inside. Through the window, Rachel reached for Emily's hand beneath the table. Michael saw it. That small act of defiance, that fragile shield of a mother protecting her child. Pride swelled in his chest, mingling with the helplessness. He pressed a hand against the wooden frame of the stable door, the rough grain biting into his palm. His jaw ached from holding back the words he longed to shout. "You will not break her," he whispered hoarsely, his voice low enough that only the horses heard. "You will not touch her spirit, Richard. I won't allow it." His eyes followed Emily, her little shoulders hunched, her chin trembling. She looked so much like Rachel in that moment. Fragile yet fierce, carrying more strength than her small frame should, and Michael felt something harden inside him. A vow as unshakable as stone. He leaned closer to the open window, speaking softly into the night. "She's mine, Richard. My blood, my child. You can put me in the dirt, chain me to these stables, strip me of everything, but you will never take my place in her heart." The stallion pawed the ground, restless. Michael placed a calming hand on its neck, his touch gentle despite the storm in his chest. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "We wait. We endure." For years, that had been his mantra. Endure. But now endurance was no longer enough. Not when Emily's light was at stake. Not when her laughter, the laughter he remembered from when she was small, when she would run into his arms shouting, "Papa!" was being smothered beneath Richard's cruelty. Michael closed his eyes, seeing her face, hearing her voice, whispering in the stables only days ago. "You're my father. I knew it was you." That memory became his anchor. "I'll protect you," he whispered into the darkness. "Whatever it costs me. I swear it." The lantern flickered in the stables, shadows dancing across the wooden beams. Michael stood tall, his back straightening, the years of humiliation no longer bending him. He could not fight openly, not yet. But in the silence, he forged his resistance. Quiet, patient, waiting for the moment when he could strike. Through the glass, Richard raised his wine, smug and certain of his dominance. Michael's eyes narrowed, his voice steady now. "Enjoy your throne, Richard, because the day will come when she will see you for what you are. And when that day comes, I'll be there to stand between you and her." The stallion huffed, stamping once, as if echoing his vow. Michael turned back into the stables, his hands steady now as he resumed brushing down the horse. Outwardly, he was the obedient servant, the shadow Richard had relegated him to be. But inside, he was a father burning with purpose, a man waiting for his chance. And though no one else could hear, the walls of the stables carried his whispered promise like a prayer. "You will not break her. You will never break her." The mansion was quiet, its long corridors steeped in shadows. The staff had retreated to their quarters, and even the candles in the hallways burned low, leaving the house bathed in muted gold. Rachel sat at her dressing table, the mirror before her reflecting a woman she barely recognized. Her hands trembled as she pulled the pins from her hair, each clink of metal against the wooden surface sounding too loud in the silence. Strands of dark hair fell loose across her shoulders, framing a face marked by weariness. She stared at herself. The red-rimmed eyes, the lines etched deeper with every year spent under Richard's rule, the quiver in her lips. Tonight's dinner replayed in her mind like a cruel performance. Emily's small voice cracking under Richard's questions. The way her daughter's shoulders hunched, shrinking against the weight of his scorn. The tears she had fought to hide. Rachel buried her face in her hands, a sob slipping out before she could stop it. This wasn't what she had promised Emily. It wasn't what she had promised herself. She had sworn to shield her daughter from cruelty, to give her a life better than the one Rachel had endured in her own youth. And yet here they were, trapped in a house where chandeliers masked cages, where her daughter was humiliated at the very table meant for family. Her chest ached. She thought of Michael in the stables, enduring humiliation in silence. She thought of the way Emily had whispered to her in that too-perfect bedroom. "Why do we stay here if it hurts him? And you, and me?" The words had been like a knife, slicing through the fragile justification Rachel clung to. Why, indeed? Her answer had always been the same: survival. Richard had power, money, influence. With him, Emily would never go hungry, never be without clothes or shelter. Rachel had traded her freedom, her pride, her love, all for the illusion of security. But tonight, as she saw Emily's spirit bruised by Richard's contempt, she realized the bargain had been poisoned from the start. Another sob shook her. She clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "What have I done?" she whispered into the empty room. She wanted to march down the hall, throw open the study door, and tell Richard she was finished with his cruelty. She wanted to scream that Emily was not his to belittle, that she would not allow him to wield power over them like a whip. But fear clamped around her throat. She knew the cost of defiance. She had seen it in Richard's eyes, the way his voice turned softer, more dangerous, when he said, "Careful." She knew what retaliation looked like. The tightening of the financial leash, the humiliation inflicted in private, the threats whispered in the dark. And now, with Emily caught in the center of this storm, Rachel's courage faltered. She pressed her fists against her mouth to stifle the sound of her weeping. The last thing she wanted was for Emily to hear, to carry more of a burden than she already did. Her gaze drifted to the small, silver-framed photograph on her dressing table, the only remnant of a past life Richard hadn't destroyed. It showed a younger Rachel, smiling, her arm around Michael, Emily nestled between them as a baby. They looked happy, whole, real. Rachel's fingers traced the glass, trembling. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the faces trapped inside. "I thought I was saving her. I thought I was saving us. But all I've done is hand her to a man who wants to crush her spirit." The weight of her guilt pressed so heavily that she slid from the chair, sinking to her knees on the rug. Her body shook with silent sobs, her forehead pressed against clasped hands like a penitent before an altar. "God, give me strength," she murmured, her voice hoarse, "because I don't know how much longer I can do this." She thought of Emily's small hand squeezing hers at dinner, the silent plea for comfort. She thought of Michael standing unseen at the edges of their lives, his dignity stripped, but his love unbroken. And she thought of Richard, sitting at the head of the table like a king on a throne, believing his cruelty would last forever. Rachel lifted her tear-streaked face, her breathing ragged. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear, a spark of defiance flickered. She wasn't ready to confront Richard yet. The terror was too sharp, the risk too high. But the seed had been planted. She could no longer ignore the truth. Her silence was no shield. Her choices had placed Emily in danger. The door creaked softly. Rachel startled, wiping her face quickly. But it was only Emily, standing in the threshold in her nightdress, clutching her rabbit, eyes wide with worry. "Mama?" her daughter whispered. "Are you okay?" Rachel forced a smile through her tears. She opened her arms, and Emily rushed into them, pressing her cheek against her mother's chest. Rachel held her close, burying her face in her daughter's hair. "Yes, my love," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'll be okay, as long as I have you." Emily hugged her tighter, her small arms offering a comfort far greater than their size. And in that moment, Rachel knew. She might not yet have the strength to stand against Richard, but she had something he would never possess. A bond unbreakable, a love fierce enough to outlast fear. For now, she would weep in silence. But one day, when the time came, she would rise. For Emily, for Michael, for herself. Richard Stonebridge stood in the shadows of his office, curtains drawn just enough to reveal the gardens below. The afternoon sun gilded every hedge and fountain with false warmth. His fingers tapped the windowsill as his gaze followed the small figure skipping along the gravel path. Emily. Her laughter floated faintly through the glass, her hair catching the light. She bent to pluck a flower, holding it like treasure, a scrap of innocence in the middle of his estate. To Richard, it was a flaw. His jaw tightened. The mansion was his kingdom, every column and tile sculpted to his vision of order. He had built it with discipline and control, and here was this child, unrefined and fragile, disrupting his perfection. She was not his blood, not his legacy. No matter how Rachel tried, Emily would never belong. "A blemish," Richard muttered, his reflection glaring back at him. He remembered his father's lessons, carved into him like scripture. Weakness is rot, mercy breeds chaos, order demands sacrifice. He had watched servants cast out, hounds taken to the woods and never returning. He had once wept for a dismissed stable hand, and earned a backhand across the face. His father's words echoed even now. "If you pity weakness, you will inherit it." Richard had hardened into steel, and staring down at Emily, he felt the truth resurface. Rachel had been useful, pliable, but her child, that was disorder made flesh. He had tolerated her long enough. Now she lingered like an ink stain on fine parchment, even daring to pull warmth back into Rachel's eyes. "She will undo everything," he murmured, "unless I act." He poured himself whiskey, the amber liquid burning like resolve. Children wandered. Horses spooked. Accidents happened. Rachel would grieve, but grief would bind her tighter. Michael. The servant was already broken, powerless. Richard's eyes lingered on Emily chasing a butterfly across the lawn. For a fleeting moment, something human flickered. A memory of his lost daughter. But it turned to ash. Compassion was weakness. Weakness was rot. He drained the glass. The child would have to be removed, not crudely, not with scandal. An accident, a tragedy, would erase the blemish and draw sympathy to him. "Order must be restored," he whispered. That night, Richard walked into the stables. Lantern light pooled across the beams, the air heavy with hay and tension. Horses shifted uneasily, hooves scraping straw, as if they sensed the storm in their master. At the far end stood the black stallion, a beast of rippling muscle, eyes wild, hooves striking sparks against the boards. Michael looked up from mucking a stall, unease in his eyes. "That one," Richard said smoothly. "He's unpredictable. Not fit for the saddle," Michael warned. "Not fit for most," Richard replied, lips curling. "But every beast can be directed." He unlatched the stall, stepping inside with gloved hands. The stallion reared, thrashing against the walls, but Richard didn't flinch. He struck with a riding crop, sharp as a gunshot. The animal roared, eyes flashing with fury. Another strike, and another. Not for discipline, for provocation. "Yes," Richard hissed, "that's what I need." Michael gripped the pitchfork, horror tightening his chest. "You'll make him dangerous." Richard's smile glinted in the lantern light. "He already is. I'm giving his nature purpose." Michael's stomach churned. He had seen this look before. A predator recognizing another. He wanted to stop it, but defiance meant ruin. So he stood, fists clenched, as Richard molded the stallion into a weapon. Richard left the stall calm, satisfied, brushing straw from his sleeve as though nothing had happened. Accidents happen, Carter, especially around animals like this. You know that better than anyone. Michael's breath came rough. He looked at the trembling, furious beast and knew Richard's plan was no idle threat. The horse had been chosen, the weapon prepared. "Over my dead body," he whispered. But inside, dread coiled. Richard was already weaving a tragedy, and Emily was in its path. Dinner at Stonebridge was always a performance. The chandeliers burned bright, the table more throne room than home. Emily sat small between Rachel and the yawning empty chairs. Servants moved silently along the walls, their eyes lowered. Richard carved his roast with surgical precision. His voice, when it came, was measured but heavy. "It's remarkable," he said, "how easily accidents happen around the stables." Emily froze. Her fork slipped, clattering too loud against china. Rachel's face went pale. "Why would you say that?" Richard dabbed his mouth with a napkin, unbothered. "Reality should never be ignored. Horses are dangerous. Even a child." His gaze slid briefly to Emily. "Could be crushed." Rachel's fingers trembled as she set down her glass. Emily clutched her rabbit under the table, hiding how her hands shook. "She doesn't go near the stables," Rachel said quickly. "She knows the rules." Richard's eyes cut to the girl, sharp as glass. "Children wander. Sometimes warnings are not enough." The servants exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone had heard the undertone. Rachel squeezed Emily's hand beneath the table. "Enough. This is hardly dinner conversation." Richard leaned back, his smile smooth again. "You're right. Forgive me. Only a caution." But Emily knew it wasn't caution, it was promise. His words wrapped in silk, hiding teeth. The rest of the meal dragged heavy. Emily pushed food around her plate, appetite gone. Rachel kept her chin high, but her eyes shimmered with fear she couldn't hide. When Richard rose, his voice was almost pleasant. "Another fine evening. Rest well." Only when the door closed did Rachel exhale. She turned to Emily, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "Don't be afraid," she whispered, though her own voice shook. Emily nodded, though her chest ached. She thought of the stallion's wild eyes, of Richard's smile. Accidents happen. The words, echoed like footsteps in the dark. Rachel pressed a kiss to her daughter's hair, a vow trembling in her chest. Whatever he plans, I will not let him take you. But the house itself seemed to whisper back Richard's threat, every chandelier and marble tile echoing the danger that now stalked their days. The gardens of Stonebridge lay bathed in afternoon light, every hedge and blossom painted in gold. The fountain at the center gurgled softly, its spray scattering rainbows. To an innocent eye, it was a sanctuary. To Emily, it was a place to play. She twirled along the stone path in her white dress, the seams clumsily mended by Rachel's hands. A stick in her hand became a wand, tapping against the fountain as if she could conjure magic. Shadow stretched across the grass nearby, head on his paws. To a stranger, he might have looked at ease. But his amber eyes never left the girl. His body hummed with unease, ears flicking at every sound. The air was too quiet. No birdsong, no wind, only the hush before a storm. Emily crouched to float a leaf in the water. "Sail away," she whispered. Shadow shifted closer, his muscles coiling. He caught a faint creak, the sound of a latch too deliberate to be chance. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Emily laid her fingers on his fur. "It's okay," she said softly. But the shepherd's stare fixed on the hedge line. His silence was warning enough. High above, Richard stood in the shadow of his office window, hands clasped behind his back. He watched the scene below with surgical calm. The child, the dog, the fountain gleaming like a stage. The decanter on his desk glowed in the dim light, untouched. His lips curved faintly. The first step of his plan was falling into place. In the garden, Emily swung her legs at the fountain's edge, humming to herself. Shadow lay close, body angled protectively, tail low. The air felt charged, heavy, and she shivered without knowing why. She clutched her stuffed rabbit tight. Then it came. The crack of iron against wood, the clatter of hooves striking straw. The sound of fury breaking loose. Shadow leapt to his feet, barking deep and sharp. Emily startled, her one stick falling to the stones. From behind the hedge thundered the black stallion. A wall of muscle and rage, mane flying, nostrils flared. The ground shook beneath his charge. Emily froze. Terror rooted her to the spot. Her breath caught in her chest. Shadow lunged forward, his bark exploding like thunder. But the stallion did not slow. From the window, Richard lifted his glass in mock salute, his smile hard. "Accidents," he murmured. The stallion screamed, hooves tearing furrows in the earth. Emily stumbled back, heel striking the fountain's edge. She fell, the stone cold against her back. The beast bore down, foam flecking its mouth. "Shadow!" she cried, voice breaking. The shepherd launched himself between them, a blur of fur and muscle. His bark cracked through the garden like a command, not a plea. He darted low, then high, snapping close to the stallion's chest. The horse veered, enraged but unsettled, striking downward. Hooves slammed inches from Emily's legs, splintering stone. Chaos erupted. Emily's sobs, the stallion's screams, Shadow's furious barks. Servants shouted, rushing from the house, but they were too far. Emily crawled backward, clutching her rabbit, whispering through tears, "Shadow, please." The shepherd's ears flicked, but his focus never broke. Each bark was measured, a soldier's defiance. He circled, driving the stallion back step by step, amber eyes locked on the beast. For the first time, the stallion faltered. Its rage met something immovable. It reared again, hooves flashing, but Shadow lunged so close his teeth grazed its chest. Foam sprayed, the beast screamed, and then wheeled away. Thunder of hooves tore across the gardens as the stallion vanished toward the fields. Silence fell, broken only by Emily's ragged sobs and the gurgle of the fountain. Shadow stood braced, chest heaving, gaze still locked on the path of retreat. Slowly, he lowered himself beside Emily, pressing his head against her side. She collapsed onto him, arms flung around his neck. Her tears soaked into his fur. "You saved me," she whispered. Shadow gave a low whine, steady and soft, his body a shield against the world. The servants arrived, gasps filling the air at the torn earth, the trail of chaos, the girl sobbing against her dog. Then Rachel came. Breathless, her face pale, she dropped to her knees, pulling Emily into her arms. "My baby, are you hurt?" Emily shook her head, crying harder. "He saved me, Mama. Shadow saved me." Rachel's trembling hands searched her daughter for wounds, relief flooding her as she found none. She pressed her lips to Emily's hair, tears spilling freely. Then her gaze met the shepherd. His chest still heaved, his body taut, but his eyes softened at the sight of the girl. Rachel's throat tightened. This house had become a place of fear. Yet here stood one protector, fierce and unyielding. From his office, Richard's expression remained stone. He drained his glass, the whiskey burning down his throat. His plan had failed, for now, but his voice was cold as he set the glass down. "Accidents," he muttered. "They can always happen again." Below, Emily clung to Shadow, her whisper hoarse but steady. "You're my hero." And Shadow pressed closer, steadfast, his body the barrier between innocence and the darkness watching from above. The sound reached him first. Michael was forking hay in the far stall when Shadow's bark split the air. Not the usual rumble of warning, but a furious roar that rattled the rafters. His blood froze. He dropped the pitchfork, heart hammering. "Emily." He didn't think so. He ran. Boots pounded across dirt, the barking growing louder, laced with a horse's scream and the faint cry of a child. By the time he reached the gardens, the scene seared itself into his mind. The black stallion rearing, foam flying from its mouth, earth torn beneath its hooves. Shadow stood planted before the fountain, hackles bristling, driving the beast back with savage barks, and clinging to his neck, pale and trembling, was Emily. Michael's chest tore with fury. He seized a rope from the hedge and charged, his voice booming, "Back!" The stallion wheeled, hooves cracking stone. Michael surged forward, swinging the rope with practiced force. "Enough!" The word split the air like a whip. Shadow lunged beside him, barking in unison. Together they forced the beast back until it bolted into the fields with a scream, vanishing into silence. Emily collapsed against Shadow, her small fingers buried in his fur. Michael dropped to his knees, pulling her close. "Emily." Her eyes met his, wide and wet. Then came the word that both broke and healed him. "Papa." He clutched her tightly, trembling. She sobbed against his chest. "I thought he was going to kill me." Michael's jaw hardened. He had seen the stallion's madness. Unnatural, provoked. This was no accident. His arms tightened around her. "You're safe. I'll never let him hurt you again." Shadow pressed close, steady eyes locking with Michael's in a silent vow. But Emily's next words turned his fury molten. He was watching. From the window. Michael looked up at the mansion's glittering panes. Richard, the puppet master, smiling at the chaos he'd unleashed. Moments later, Richard appeared, whiskey in hand, his voice dripping with feigned concern. "My word. What on earth happened here?" Michael rose, shielding Emily behind him. "You know exactly what happened." Richard's mask of composure never faltered. "I see a frightened child, a spirited horse, a rattled servant. Accidents, Carter. Nothing more." Michael's fists clenched. "You provoked him. You've been goading that stallion into rage for days." For a flicker, Richard's eyes hardened, then smoothed into indifference. "Careful. You forget your place." "My place," Michael growled, "is protecting my daughter. With or without your permission." Shadow's low growl filled the silence. Emily pressed tighter against her father. Richard smirked. "So dramatic. Perhaps years in the stables have poisoned your imagination." He downed his whiskey, leaving the empty glass by the fountain. "See, the stables are secured. We wouldn't want another accident." His footsteps faded, but his shadow lingered. Rachel arrived breathless, collapsing beside Emily. She kissed her daughter's hair, asking if she was hurt. Emily shook her head, clinging to Shadow. Then, trembling, she whispered the truth again. Richard was watching. He was smiling. Rachel froze. Color drained from her face. She turned to Michael. His grim eyes said what hers refused. "I believe her." Her denial cracked. Tears welled as she pulled Emily close. "My sweet girl, thank you for telling me." Emily's voice quivered but grew steady. "He doesn't want me here, Mama. He tried to make the horse hurt me." Michael crouched, voice raw. "With all my heart, Emily. I believe you." Shadow rumbled low, affirming her words. Rachel's gaze drifted back to the mansion, its windows reflecting dusk. Memories surfaced. Richard's cold remarks. Veiled threats she had excused as habit. No more. Emily's courage had stripped away every lie. He had wanted this. Her whisper cracked. "God help me. I know." Michael's hand closed over hers. His voice was steel. "She's telling the truth, and you know it." Rachel nodded, fragile but resolute. For the first time, she didn't look away. The three of them knelt together in the torn garden, Shadow guarding close, while the mansion loomed above. Fear still pressed heavy, but beneath it flickered something new. Defiance. Rachel's voice broke into the silence. "We'll find a way out. I swear it." Michael's jaw tightened. Together. And though Richard's shadow lingered, the vow was born. The garden had not yet recovered from the chaos. Torn soil lay scattered like wounds, the fountain's water still rippling from the struggle. Emily clung to Shadow's fur, her sobs fading into hiccups. Michael crouched beside her, jaw tight with fury. Rachel's arms wrapped them both, her eyes fixed on the mansion's dark windows with a new, unflinching suspicion. Then came the shuffle of feet. Lanterns swayed into view as the staff emerged, faces pale in the glow. At the front was Mrs. Miller, the housekeeper whose steady hands had served Stonebridge longer than most. She stopped short at the sight, the torn earth, Emily trembling against her mother, Shadow standing guard, eyes glowing in the lantern light. "Oh, dear Lord," Mrs. Miller whispered. Behind her, the cook, gardener, maids, even the stable boy lingered. Each had their own memory of Richard's cruelty, but never before had it stood so plainly before them. Michael rose slowly, his arm around Emily. His gaze swept the staff. Their silence told him what he already knew. They had always seen. Rachel stood beside him, no longer hiding. Mrs. Miller knelt to Emily's level, voice soft. "Sweetheart, are you hurt?" Emily buried her face deeper into Shadow's fur. Mrs. Miller's gaze lifted to Rachel, and in that silence, a truth passed between them. Rachel's voice broke it. He was watching, from the window. A murmur rippled through the staff. The stable boy's fists clenched. Finally his voice trembled. "I saw him striking the stallion. He wanted it mad." Rachel's breath caught. "You saw?" The boy nodded. "I didn't know what he meant to do, but now I do." Mrs. Miller straightened, lantern held firm. "This isn't cruelty. This is evil." Michael's voice carried through the quiet. "You all know the truth. He set this in motion, and he won't stop." The staff shifted uneasily, fear battling with resolve. The cook crossed herself. The gardener spat into the dirt. One by one, the whispers turned to certainty. Richard had gone too far. Rachel clutched Emily tighter, her tears burning. "I thought staying here was protecting her, but I only put her in more danger." Michael steadied her shoulder. "No more silence." The staff nodded faintly. For the first time, their eyes carried not just fear, but defiance. And then Richard appeared. He descended the terrace steps with deliberate calm, a glass of whiskey in hand. His footsteps crunched too loud against the silence. He stopped at the edge of the crowd, his eyes sweeping over them all, sharp and dangerous. "What is this?" His voice dripped mockery. "My garden turned into a stage for rebellion?" Michael stepped forward, rigid. "This ends now, Richard. We all saw what happened." Richard's smile was thin. "The stable hand speaks. Tell me, Carter, when did it become your place to question me?" "When your cruelty nearly killed my daughter." Gasps broke through the staff. Shadow growled, low and steady. For a heartbeat, Richard's mask slipped. His voice sharpened. "That child is not mine. She is an obstacle, a reminder of weakness. She does not belong in this house." Rachel staggered, her face draining. Emily sobbed, pressing into her mother's shoulder. The staff froze, horror written across their faces. Michael surged forward, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare speak about her like that." Richard turned on him, venom spilling. "You are nothing but a servant. I could end you with a word." And as for the girl, his gaze cut to Emily, cold. "She will learn what happens to those who disrupt order in my house." The staff gasped. For years they had whispered, but to hear such cruelty aloud shattered the silence forever. Rachel's tears spilled, but behind them blazed fire. She stepped forward, clutching Emily tight. Her voice trembled but rang clear. "Enough, Richard. No more lies. No more pretending. We all heard you. We all saw." Richard's eyes snapped to her. "Careful, Rachel. Remember who gives you this life." Rachel shook her head. "You've given nothing but chains. Tonight you tried to break my child. I will not stand for it." His mask faltered. He glanced at the staff, their eyes no longer downcast, but filled with disgust. Rachel's chin lifted, her voice rising. "For years, I let fear silence me. I told myself your wealth was protection. But tonight proved the truth. You are the danger. You always have been." Her words cracked the air like thunder. Mrs. Miller raised her lantern higher, as if illuminating the truth Rachel had spoken aloud. Emily's small voice broke through, muffled but steady. "Mama, you believe me now?" Rachel kissed her daughter's hair, whispering fiercely, "Yes, my love. I believe you. And I will never let him silence us again." The girl sobbed in relief. clutching tighter. Shadow leaned against them, his amber eyes fixed on Richard like judgment itself. Richard's fury rose, voice booming. "You ungrateful woman! Everything you have I gave you." Rachel cut him off. "What you gave me was a cage. Tonight, I choose dignity over fear, and I choose my daughter." The staff murmured, outrage flaring. The stable boy's jaw tightened. The cook crossed herself again. Mrs. Miller's eyes glistened with pride. Michael stepped beside Rachel, steady as a pillar. He needed no words. His presence alone affirmed her stand. Richard turned on the staff. "Do not listen to this madness. I am your master." But their silence was no longer obedience. It was defiance. Their eyes met his, unyielding. Rachel drew a long, shaking breath. Her final words rang through the night. "You may still have this house, Richard, but you no longer have me, and you will never have my child." The lantern swayed in the breeze, casting flickering light across torn earth. Emily whispered through tears, "I love you, Mama." Rachel kissed her hair, voice unbreakable. "And I love you. That's all we need." Richard stood frozen, his fury powerless against truth spoken aloud. And for the first time in years, Rachel felt the chains shatter. She was terrified, yes, but she was free. Every witness present knew it. Stonebridge would never be the same again. The lanterns flickered low. The garden still smelled of torn earth and sweat, the echo of hooves lingering in the night. Rachel stood clutching Emily. Shadow pressed close, while Michael remained tall at her side. For a moment, the world held still, waiting. Then Richard snapped. His mask shattered like glass. His voice, once smooth, erupted with venom. "You think you can defy me? In my house? Do you fools not understand? I own everything you see. The land, the roof over your heads, the food in your mouths. Without me, you are nothing." The words cracked like a whip. The staff flinched, but did not move. Emily buried her face against her mother's chest. Shadow growled, low and steady, eyes locked on the man who called himself master. Michael stepped forward. His voice was steady, deep, unshaken. "You own bricks and land, Richard. Nothing more. You don't own her. You don't own Rachel. And you'll never own me." Richard's face twisted. "Do you think dignity will feed you? That loyalty will clothe your daughter? Without me, you'll starve in the gutter. That child will learn hunger again, Rachel. Is that what you want?" Rachel's breath caught. But Michael's hand found hers, steady, his voice cut like steel. "I know hunger, Richard. I've lived with nothing but dirt beneath my boots, and I'd take that life again, 1,000 times, before I let her live another day under your roof of poison." Whispers spread through the staff. Mrs. Miller's eyes shone. The cook crossed herself. Even the stable boy stood taller, emboldened. Richard roared louder, desperate now. "You'll regret this. I'll strip you of every coin. I'll see to it no one hires you. You'll crawl back, begging at my feet." Michael's jaw tightened. Years of silence, years of humiliation in the stables, all of it burned away. His voice thundered. "You can take money. You can take land. You can break backs and fill bellies with hunger, but you will never have the only thing that matters." He turned to Emily and Rachel, his gaze softening. Then back to Richard, fire in his eyes. "Family, loyalty, love. You cannot buy them. You cannot cage them. And without them, Richard, you are the poorest man I have ever seen, The words struck like a blow. Richard faltered, pale, breath-catching. For the first time, the staff saw not a master, but a man stripped bare, hollow, consumed by his own emptiness. Shadow's growl deepened. Emily peeked out from her mother's arms, and for the first time, she looked at Richard without fear, only pity. Rachel's voice joined Michael's, quiet but unyielding. "You have wealth, Richard, but it's a tomb. You sit in it alone. Tonight, I choose life. With my child, with the man who has never stopped loving her. We don't need your money. We never did." Richard's hand trembled around his glass. His eyes darted to the staff, but their faces were no longer blank. They had seen the truth. They judged him now in silence. He smashed the glass against the fountain. Shards scattered like sparks. "You'll regret this. You'll crawl back to me. You'll see what it means to spit on Stonebridge." Michael didn't flinch. His voice was low, steady, final. "No, Richard. The only one crawling back will be you. Back into this empty house, surrounded by everything money can buy, and nothing that matters." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stood trembling, his chest heaving, but powerless. Rachel shifted Emily higher in her arms. Shadow pressed against them. Michael stood tall beside her, no longer the servant in shadows, but the protector in the light. And as the staff watched, lanterns casting halos around them, it was clear. Richard had lost. Not his house, not his fortune, but the one thing he could never buy. Rachel bent, setting Emily on her feet. The girl swayed, gripping her mother's hand. Rachel's voice trembled, but her resolve was iron. "We're leaving." The words were soft, but they rippled through the garden like thunder. Richard's head snapped up. "You dare. You think you can walk out of Stonebridge. This is your life, Rachel. Without me, you have nothing." Rachel's face was pale, but unyielding. "Without you, I finally have everything. I have my child. I have dignity. That's more than you'll ever hold." Richard stepped forward, but Shadow bared his teeth, a living barrier. Richard froze, fury blazing, but he did not cross. Michael's hand touched Rachel's shoulder. His voice was steady. "Come. Don't waste another breath on him." Rachel nodded. She turned toward the gates. Emily clung to her hand. Shadow walked at her side, head high. Michael followed close, his frame a wall of strength. The staff parted, their lanterns lighting the path. Quiet gestures followed. Mrs. Miller pressed her hand to her chest. The cook murmured, "God go with you." The gardener gave a firm nod. The stable boy whispered, "I won't stay. Not under him. Not after this." Each gesture stitched a thread of defiance. Richard's empire of fear had cracked, and through the cracks poured truth. Richard's voice roared behind them. "You'll regret this. All of you. Do you hear me?" But the words rang hollow. Rachel did not look back. Her spine was straight, her chin lifted. Each step carried her further from chains once called safety. Emily glanced up, her small voice fragile. "Mama, are we really leaving?" Rachel squeezed her hand. "Yes, my love. We're leaving for good." Tears welled in the child's eyes, but they were not only fear, they were relief. She looked at Shadow and whispered into his fur, "We're free." At the gates, Rachel paused. She turned not to Richard, but to the staff who had witnessed everything. Her voice was soft, but it carried. "Thank you." No one answered aloud. They didn't need to. Their eyes said enough. They were no longer blind. Rachel turned back. With a final push, the iron gates groaned open. The road beyond lay dark, uncertain, but free. She stepped forward, Emily's hand in hers, Shadow pacing beside them. Michael is steady behind. The mansion loomed, cold and glittering, but already fading into the night. Richard's furious voice echoed faintly from its walls. Powerless now. For the first time in years, Rachel drew a full breath. Emily squeezed her hand. Shadow pressed close. Michael's footsteps matched her own. They didn't know where the road would lead, but they knew this. They would walk it together, and Stonebridge, with all its wealth and cruelty, was gone. The seasons turned, and with them, life. Months had passed since the night Rachel, Emily, Michael, and Shadow walked out of Stonebridge beneath the trembling lanterns of silent witnesses. The weight of marble and chandeliers was gone, replaced by the humbler rhythm of a modest farmhouse tucked at the edge of rolling fields. Morning sunlight streamed through thin curtains into rooms that smelled of wood smoke and fresh bread instead of polished stone. The house was small, its walls worn by years, but its air felt alive, full of laughter, full of breath, full of something no wealth could purchase. Michael stood in the yard, sleeves rolled, his broad hands rough from honest work. He had taken up a place at a nearby carpentry shop, his days filled with the scent of pine and cedar, the scrape of saws, the satisfaction of shaping something useful. When he came home, his shirt carried the smell of sweat and wood shavings, and Emily would rush to him, laughing, shouting "Papa!" before leaping into his arms. Rachel, too, had found her rhythm again. No longer the ornament of a cruel man's table. She taught at the village schoolhouse, her voice steady as she guided young hands over letters and numbers. The children adored her, and for the first time in years, she felt her life had meaning beyond survival. In the evenings, she would walk home with her satchel of books and pause at the gate, watching the farmhouse glow with lamplight, her heart swelling with gratitude. Emily thrived. The little girl who had once shrunk in silence at a long dinner table now ran freely through fields of tall grass, her laughter rising into the sky like music. She wore patched dresses, but she didn't care. Her shoes were scuffed from running, her knees often scraped from climbing fences, but her eyes shone with joy, and always at her side was Shadow. The shepherd bounded beside her as she darted through the fields, his ears perked, his amber eyes alive with devotion. He chased when she ran, slowed when she grew tired, and lay quietly when she picked wildflowers, his steady presence anchoring her every step. The scars of Stonebridge still lived in Emily's memory, but Shadow's loyalty had become her shield, a constant reminder that she was not alone. One afternoon, as the sky stretched wide and blue, Emily sat in the grass, weaving flowers into a crown. Shadow lay stretched across the earth, his chest rising with slow, patient breaths. She leaned against him, pressing the crown onto his head with a giggle. "You're a king now," she whispered, her fingers brushing his fur. "My king." Shadow gave a small huff, his tail thumping once against the grass. He looked at her with eyes that held a depth no child could fully understand, but she felt it. She hugged him tight, burying her face in his neck, and in that embrace was healing. From the porch, Rachel watched with a soft smile. Her hands rested on the railing, the golden light of late afternoon warming her face. Behind her, Michael stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. He followed her gaze, and for a moment, silence stretched between them. "She's smiling again," Rachel said softly. Michael nodded, his eyes never leaving his daughter. "She's free." Rachel turned to him, her voice lower. "And so am I." He looked at her then, truly looked, not with the weary eyes of a man crushed by Richard's chains, but with the quiet strength of someone who had reclaimed himself. His hand found hers, rough palm against soft fingers, and she held it tight. The staff at Stonebridge still sent word sometimes. Little notes passed through town, whispers carried by the market. Some had left Richard's service entirely, unwilling to live in the hollow mansion of a tyrant. Others stayed, quietly enduring, but always with eyes wide open now. Richard's empire remained, but its foundation was cracked. For Rachel, for Michael, for Emily, it no longer mattered. Their world was here, in the small farmhouse, in the laughter of fields, in the warmth of Shadow's steady presence. That night, as dusk settled and fireflies sparked in the tall grass, the family gathered around a simple wooden table. The meal was plain: bread, stew, apples from the orchard nearby. But the air was filled with laughter. Emily chattered about the flowers she had found. Rachel teased Michael about the shavings in his hair. And Shadow lay at their feet, tail sweeping contentedly across the floor. For the first time in years, Rachel felt no need to glance over her shoulder, no fear of a cold voice breaking the peace. Emily's giggles filled the room. Shadow's steady breathing warmed the silence, and Michael's rough hand brushed hers beneath the table. When Emily grew sleepy, she rested her head against Shadow, her small fingers tangled in his fur. Rachel tucked a blanket around her, her eyes soft as she whispered, "Sleep well, my love." Michael leaned back, the glow of lamplight catching the lines on his face. He looked at Rachel, then at Emily, then at the shepherd, who had become more than a dog, a guardian, a symbol of survival, of love, that endured cruelty and rose stronger. "This," Michael said quietly, his voice rough but certain, "is enough. More than enough." Rachel's hand slipped into his. "It's everything." Outside, the wind rustled through the fields, carrying the promise of tomorrow. And for the family who had once been chained by fear, the months had turned into something precious. Freedom, dignity, love, the true riches of life. The afternoon sun hung warm and golden above the fields, painting the world in soft light. A breeze carried the sweet scent of wildflowers and the distant sound of bees humming lazily from bloom to bloom. It was the kind of day Emily once only dreamed of. A day without locked doors, without whispered rules at a long table, without the shadow of cruelty pressing in. Now, the only shadow that followed her was one of love. Her bicycle wobbled slightly as she pedaled down the dirt path that cut through the meadow. The frame was second-hand, its paint chipped, its bell dented, but to Emily, it was a treasure. Her laughter spilled into the open air as she gained speed, her hair flying behind her, her cheeks flushed pink with joy. And running beside her, never falling behind, was Shadow. The German shepherd kept perfect pace with her wheels, his body flowing with power and grace. His ears flicked to every sound, his nose lifted to the wind, but his eyes never strayed far from the girl on the bicycle. Each stride was a vow renewed. Wherever she went, he would follow. Emily lifted her hands from the handlebars for a daring moment, stretching them wide, as though she could embrace the sky. "Look, Shadow," she called, her voice bubbling with delight. "I'm flying." Shadow barked once, sharp and bright, as though to answer, "Yes, fly. I'll keep you safe." Rachel stood at the edge of the field, her skirts fluttering in the breeze, one hand shading her eyes. Beside her, Michael leaned on the fence post, the lines of his face softened by a rare smile. They watched as their daughter rode freely, unburdened, her laughter rising higher than the birds that wheeled overhead. "She's different," Rachel whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Michael nodded slowly, his eyes still on Emily. "No. She's herself again. This is who she was always meant to be." The bicycle rattled over stones, but Emily only laughed harder, unafraid. Shadow darted closer, nudging her leg gently with his shoulder, steadying her path. He knew the terrain, knew every dip and turn of the field, and where danger might trip her, he smoothed the way. To Emily, it felt like magic. To Michael and Rachel, it was trust embodied in fur and muscle. As she reached the far end of the field, Emily slowed, then swung her legs down, planting her feet firmly on the earth. She was breathless, cheeks glowing, her eyes alight with the thrill of freedom. Shadow circled once before stopping beside her, his tongue lolling, his breath heavy but content. Emily threw her arms around his neck, pressing her face into his fur. "You're the best, Shadow, the best in the whole world." The shepherd whined softly, nuzzling her shoulder, his tail sweeping the grass in broad strokes. He had no words, but his presence said everything. "I was there. I will always be there." From their place at the fence, Rachel's hand found Michael's. He squeezed gently, his rough palm warm against hers. "She'll never forget this," he said quietly. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but they were not the tears of fear she had once wept. They were tears of gratitude, of healing. "Neither will I." Emily climbed back on her bike, pushing off again. The wheels spun, the chain rattled, and she shot forward, Shadow bounding at her side. The image was one Rachel knew would etch itself into memory. Her daughter, once caged by fear, now flying across the meadow, guarded by a dog who asked for nothing but the chance to protect. Every bark Shadow gave, every stride he matched with Emily's, was more than instinct. It was a silent covenant between them, of loyalty, of survival, of love beyond words. The wind lifted Emily's laughter across the field, and even Michael, a man who had endured so much silence, let out a quiet laugh of his own. He pulled Rachel close, pressing a kiss to her temple, his voice low but full of certainty. "We've given her back her childhood." Rachel nodded, her heart swelling as she watched Emily throw her head back in laughter, Shadow's dark figure a constant at her side. "And he's given us all our lives back." The sun dipped lower, the meadow awash in gold. Emily slowed her bike near the fence, breathless and beaming. "Mama! Papa! Did you see?" she called. Rachel cupped her hands to her mouth. "We saw, sweetheart," Shadow barked again, as though to add his own applause, and Emily giggled, leaning down to kiss the top of his head. In that moment, the memory of Stonebridge seemed distant, powerless. The marble halls, the iron gates, the voice that once called Emily an obstacle, all of it crumbled before the sight of a little girl on her bicycle, a shepherd running beside her, and parents who loved her more than life itself. Freedom was not marble or gold. It was this: laughter in open fields, the steady thrum of wheels on dirt, and a loyal dog's shadow racing forever at her side. The sun was sinking low, spilling gold across the meadow. The small farmhouse glowed in its light, its windows catching fire like warm lanterns against the encroaching dusk. The air smelled of grass and wood smoke, the kind of scent that felt like belonging. Emily sat cross-legged at the edge of the porch, Shadow stretched beside her with his head in her lap. She traced little circles on his fur with her fingers, humming softly to herself. Michael and Rachel sat on the steps above, their shoulders touching, watching the day close around them. For a long while, there was only the chorus of evening, crickets beginning their song, the distant lowing of cows, the rustle of the wind through tall grass. It was the kind of quiet that had once felt foreign to Rachel, who had lived too long in a house where silence was a weapon. Here, it was healing. Emily lifted her gaze toward the sky. The clouds glowed pink and orange, stretching like ribbons. She sighed softly, her small face thoughtful in the fading light. Then she spoke, her voice clear, carrying into the stillness. "Mama? Papa?" Rachel smiled gently. "Yes, darling?" Emily's eyes glistened as she leaned into Shadow's warm shoulder. "We're rich, aren't we?" Michael chuckled softly, glancing around at the modest porch, the patched roof, the simple yard. "Well," he said with a wry smile, "we don't have much money." "Not like Stonebridge." Emily shook her head fiercely, her curls bouncing. "No, not that kind of rich." She lifted her chin, her small voice ringing with conviction. "We're rich because we have each other." The words settled into the evening air like a blessing. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth, her heart twisting with emotion. Michael blinked hard, his throat tightening. Rachel leaned down, gathering Emily into her arms, Shadow shifting to press against them both. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes, my love. You're right. We are rich. Richer than we ever dreamed." Michael wrapped his arms around them, pulling Rachel and Emily close, his rough hand resting on Shadow's back. He kissed the crown of Emily's hair, his voice low but steady. "And no one can ever take that from us." The four of them stayed bound together as the sun slipped below the horizon, their silhouettes a single shape against the sky. A family, healed and whole. Across town, Stonebridge loomed in darkness. Richard sat alone in his great dining hall, chandeliers blazing above him, their light reflecting off polished silver and crystal glasses. The tables stretched long and empty, set with more food than one man could ever eat. The silence pressed against him, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire. He poured himself another glass of whiskey, the amber liquid trembling in his hand. He drank, but it did not warm him. Around him were paintings, sculptures, walls of marble, every symbol of wealth a man could crave. Yet the house felt hollow, the silence unbearable. His thoughts returned, unbidden, to the garden. Emily's eyes wide with terror, Shadow's defiance, Rachel's words of finality. "You will never have my child." And then Michael's voice, cutting through everything. "You are the poorest man I have ever seen." Richard's jaw clenched. He told himself he still had everything, the estate, the money, the servants who remained. Yet as he sat alone at the endless table, the truth pressed in. He had no laughter to fill the halls, no love to warm the rooms, no one to whisper his name with tenderness. He lifted his glass again, but it slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound echoed through the cavernous room, and for the first time, Richard felt the weight of what he had lost. At the farmhouse, Emily snuggled against Shadow, her eyes growing heavy. Rachel smoothed her daughter's hair, her voice soft as she hummed a lullaby. Michael leaned back, watching the stars blink into life above the fields, his heart full in a way it had never been beneath chandeliers. They were rich indeed, not with gold or land, but with something far greater. Love, loyalty, each other. And as the night wrapped around them, Shadow's steady breathing anchoring them all, Rachel and Michael knew Emily had spoken the final lesson. They were free, they were whole, and they had everything that mattered. Sometimes, stories like this remind us what really matters. Love doesn't need wealth or titles. It's in the small, loyal acts that never falter. A German shepherd like Shadow doesn't ask for anything in return, yet gives everything he has. Protection, trust, companionship. That kind of bond changes us, softens us, and stays with us long after the moment has passed. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt that quiet understanding, you know it's something rare and beautiful. And if you'd like to explore ways to strengthen that connection, to understand them a little better, maybe give back even a fraction of the loyalty they've given you, there are some wonderful resources out there I can point you to, only if you're curious. For now, I'll just leave you with this. We may not all have riches, but if we have the love of a loyal friend at our side, especially one with 4 paws and a steady gaze, we are wealthier than we'll ever know.